by using their bodies, by doing physical labor, which isn't how the white people in Vegas are ever portrayed. And it's like it's a Romeo and Juliet story. So I guess I'm trying to think about just like people's relationships according to Vegas, like whether or not they come into the city together or leave together, and whether or not their relationship survives. I might look a little bit at The Hangover because The Hangover is obviously like a male bonding like spectacle film. But what I think is more interesting about it is that movie Bridesmaids that came out a couple years ago. What happens in Bridesmaids that is interesting according to Vegas is they get on a plane to go to Vegas, but they never get there. The plane gets derailed because the Wig's character throws a fit on an airplane and then it lands, and so they're able to have a successful wedding at the end of it. The friends are able to remain friends, but a lot of times, if you look at like something like Showgirls, like women aren't allowed to do that. White women aren't allowed to do that. And Showgirls too, her two friends that when she arrives in Vegas are already fixtures. One's a dancer and one Taylor. She makes costumes for Vegas shows. They're also black, and I don't think that's a coincidence. And then I got that book that you told me about called Learning from Vegas. The thing about it that I'm most interested in is that chapter on permanence and change. And then also I am interested in the way that because the strip will always be there, but it's constantly changing, and how I kind of think that Vegas, especially from a plane, like looking down, just sort of looks like a movie set anyway. That it's just sort of like America's living movie set. And I might mention how in the 90s too, up to now, it's also become a destination for sequels. It's just like, oh, we don't know what to do with these characters, like they can just go to Vegas. And that will be like Honey, I Blew Up the Kid is in Vegas for seemingly like no reason. And just like something else sort of interesting is that a lot of times when these movies start, and the characters first arrive in Vegas, they hit like a big jackpot in a slot machine right away, and then gradually lose like everything if it's like indecent or whatever. Yeah.
So what drew you to this set of problems about Vegas?
Well, I guess what drew me to Vegas originally was just like how there's so many in the 90s, and how even though I kind of like movies like Swingers and Very Bad Things and Leaving Las Vegas and Showgirls especially, I really really like it. But I always knew that my pleasure of it was informed by how much I shouldn't like it, like how chauvinistic it is and how inappropriate it is, and it comes about in a time where being like politically correct is more important, and so I feel like these movies say like, well, if you put it in Vegas, it doesn't matter. Like we can get away with this if it's in Vegas. If it was, in our hometown, if we kept the characters at home, it would be more problematic.
Is more important than, but being politically correct was more important than it is now. You mean?
Yeah, I think so. And then and so it's like, well, let's put it in Vegas where somebody like Frank Sinatra is, our icon, even though like he was like. Now we know he was just a giant prick, but we forgive him because, it's Vegas, baby, or whatever.
How does, so a couple of things occur to me, right? Like one is that the way people talk about Verhoeven, the discourse, the kind of a tourist discourse around Verhoeven is that his movies, many of his movies, all of his movies, have kind of an ironic attitude or disposition or just are examples of irony. And so one way in which Showgirls gets validated, right, besides so the studio recirculates Showgirls by making the irony obvious by putting together a box with a kind of with a book that has like drinking games but also things Rocky Horror like things that the audience can do to sort of chant at the screen in a participatory manner and all that kind of stuff. But the critics who like it as well claim that it's all like sort of all of the misogyny and racism in it is ironic and meant to be critical, right? In the same way that Starship Troopers, right? You could read Starship Troopers as just kind of a straight up fascist, a celebration of fascism, But Verhoeven's defenders read it as ironized, and they say stuff like, "Well, see, there's the Doogie Howser guy in a leather trench coat, so it must be ironic, right?" So that might be um, that might be that might be something to to think about. And then the second thing I think I've forgotten.
Okay, Showgirls to me, I mean, I do think that there is a sense of irony, but I think that the reason why it works is because it's not irony, it's just hyperbolized,
Right.
where everything is happening but just in sharper contrast is why I think it's interesting during the 90s, during movies that are like Hard Eight, it's kind of exactly like it, but it just tries to like undercover its misogyny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably right. I wasn't saying that what people say about Verhoeven is true. I was just saying that they say it. Are there people?
I guess since we're dealing with people in Vegas, I think it's interesting, like the psychology behind people wanting to go to Vegas. Because to me, it seems like they want to go to Vegas because they want to win money. That's the one thing. It's like, even if you know the odds are against you, it's like they have this idea that like they're gonna win money. So it's interesting, just when we were talking about capital, like how much capital you think could be in Vegas, and it's like the only city I can think of that's like truly a tourist city. It just I don't know, it's interesting. When I was a young kid, I went to a small town called Cripple Creek, Colorado, for vacation, and it was just a small, quaint town. I forgot it had some historical significance maybe with Colorado, but then my parents went there like 5 or 6 years later, and when I went there, the whole town was transformed into a casino, and they had like no, it's just like all businesses like McDonald's like that. Like the only like grocery store they had was like a woman's closet apparently. Like that was it. So it's really weird how much that had changed the whole landscape of the city just by this idea of money and greed and that type of thing. So I think that's really interesting how people psychologically act around in Vegas. Because it's all kind of money driven. And although you spend a lot of money on other things, it's like at the end of the day, everyone wants to make money. It's like that's their dream that they do the lottery or whatever.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. Like, I think in Swingers, like, there's this emphasis too on like getting free drinks, where like there's like a cheating the system that goes on in Vegas. I think, and I think that like that doubles back and on like my thesis of like it being just like it doubles back on itself being like, oh yeah, we can like touch this girl's butt. Like it's the same thing. It's like the idea of getting away with something that you shouldn't otherwise be getting away with. Yeah, I haven't been to Vegas, but yeah, when I go to the casinos in Oregon that are on like Indian reservations, I think it's you can smoke inside, which is like super crazy to me that you can smoke inside everywhere. So then I decided that like I could do anything I wanted, and I almost got kicked out for taking
Taking a picture.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, because it's like gambling laws, and the guy was like, "Miss, you need to put your camera on," and I just pretended to be a little more Asian than I actually am, and then it was fine.
I forget. Does the cooler take place in Vegas?
It does. It does.
But
Yeah. No, I think I will watch it, but it's more like in my periphery. I guess I just don't. It's not. I'm more interested in the ones in the 90s, honestly, and I know that Ocean's 11 is like 2000, but I also think that's where like a distinct change begins in those movies, where it is more of like it starts to be kind of idealized again in a weird way. Whereas like in the 90s, it feels like a really decrepit, gross place. Like in the
I don't remember the clue that well, but from what I remember from just thinking about it now, it seems to present it less as a spectacle than these other films. So one of the things that I've been hearing you say is Vegas being presented as kind of this place of decadence, but it's only allowed to be decadent for males, or females, or if they try to indulge in this kind of decadence, punished for it.
Yeah, they have to work for it.
White males specifically,
right.
And then anyone with
I mean, the
any
slogan
non-white
for
is
Vegas.
put in some sort of service position.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah, kind of. Like, there's something that I got on, I mean, it takes its title from, like, the What Happens in Vegas Stays in Vegas
Right.
advertisements, but about how CSI treats women in Vegas and how they're always dead. They're basically always prostitutes and they're always dead. Yeah. Or showgirls or strippers. And I mean, it does treat, like, showgirls is, like, big reveal at the end is that, like, she was actually a prostitute. Like, it has this, because prostitution's, like, legalized, it has this really weird attitude that's, like, being a showgirl is the same as being a stripper, which is the same as just being a hooker. It's like women just really have, like, one world, which is kind of the same as being a cocktail waitress in Part 8. Like, yeah, you only have one function, and it's to, like, wear a skirt and take it off.
I think I mean, I think that's somewhere that's the core thing in the project, right? But I think also it might be worth checking into whether prostitution is actually legal in Las Vegas itself.
No, it's like
It's just in
just
Nevada,
the periphery,
right?
yeah.
In the periphery of Vegas. So that might be interesting. And then you reminded me of what I was going to say, the second thing, which was that I think it's worth taking CSI seriously as a kind of point of reference, but also a lot of this stuff you were saying. Oh no, I guess that's in LA. But I think there's episodes of Entourage when they go to Vegas that might be interesting to the project. Because there are precisely white dudes who roll into town and don't have to work for much.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like, I know Louis brought it up last time, that, like, mid-90s is when it started going from, it sort of faded slow and then started going back up when they realized they could just make it into an amusement park. I went on a family vacation there in 94, 95 or something, and we went to, the MGM Grand had, like, an actual amusement park with roller coasters and stuff. Not like, New York is like the one roller coaster or whatever, but it was like its own self-contained place. But even looking at pictures of it then versus like what it is now, it's completely like night and day. Versus now it's just completely the lights, the making money. It's almost I mean not quite a parody of itself, but it's sort of where the people wanted it to be before that it finally has like the money or whatever now. So yeah, I think it'd be interesting to track the differences in the movies in that like 15-year period or 20-year period or whatever, from when Vegas sort of was at its low to like how it developed and how the movies sort of portrayed that.
Let me have to look at the Martin Scorsese.
Real Casino. I read a Casino and it didn't play.
Oh, really?
So I have to try to get
I think it's only really important if you do that, like emphasize that part of it, because I mean the whole the way the ending of that movie is constructed, right, is exactly on that kind of divide. Like you've just seen the real part of the old Vegas, and then here's the new, and you see all the folks in leisure suits, so then amusement park and stuff like that. Did you so you're looking at this Soderbergh Ocean's 11?
Oh yeah, I mean I watched. Oh, how do you say his last name? I watched the other one. I think that I don't even like the original that much. Like I think it's one of Soderbergh's best movies because he knows his limits. Like it doesn't try to be too ambitious. It's kind of a stock Hollywood movie. But like the first, I mean they both deal with having an estranged wife. But the second one is just more articulate because the first one they literally filmed it when they were not busy. They had that Vegas stint. And then they filmed it during their free time, which is probably like a bad way to make a movie. Just like whenever you have 10 minutes. And Frank refused to have he didn't want to do more than one take, and you can really tell. And they're only together once.
Oh, all together.
Yeah, they're only all together at the very end when they're leaving that funeral. But yeah, but I mean, I might deal with it a little bit because a lot of those early movies, when Vegas is at Vegas's height, they don't seem to like idealize it or even like it. They're very much it is kind of like a disgusting place, and it's only once the remodel starts to happen does it become like a fun destination.
So this might be a really stupid question because I'm going to ask about a movie before, so I'm asking about it kind of based on what I think it's
Showgirls?
about. No. Does Bubba Hotep take place?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm also looking at movies that have like a stopover in Vegas. Like I watched Midnight Run yesterday because there's like this stopover in Vegas, which makes that white male to male friendship possible. Or there's always like these. They didn't have Con Air that I flavor, but I think that is one that like has a little bit of Vegas in it. So I'm trying to look at those too, but.
Okay, because I know it's about an aging Elvis
The
lookalike,
impersonator, yeah.
and I think that would fit into kind of the result of all the decadence. I haven't seen it, so.
Yeah, or like the refashioning of an icon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's what we do in Vegas is we impersonate Vegas in Vegas over and over and over again.
Are you looking at sort of, I can't remember if they did come out in the 90s or slightly before, slightly after, like sort of period piece films almost, like I guess Bugsy was partially about building
Oh no,
Las
I
Vegas,
haven't seen that.
and
Shit.
Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which
Oh yeah, I haven't.
would have a biracial buddy movie, but it's still about almost what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, or we can do all these crazy things because we're in Vegas, although the book was probably extremely exaggerated about what they actually did.
Mhm.
So
No, I will.
those are kind of period pieces that came out in the 90s, I think.
Yeah, that was the strange thing to me is that like when I looked up all the movies that took place in Vegas in the 90s, very few of them are period pieces, which is strange because they are trying to. It seems like they're nostalgic, but they a lot of times they just go in their jeans and t-shirts too. Yeah, that's interesting. I should look at some period pieces.
It could also be in a way. I mean, I wonder. This is a different kind of movie in the cities question, but that makes me wonder. Since the '90s is when the new Vegas is really emerging and consolidating itself, what kind of movies the Vegas Tourist Board and Film Board gave the extra incentives to make, and it could be that that they figured it didn't matter whether the representation was positive or not, but just kind of like showing the new Vegas as a way of promoting tourism. That's one thing we haven't really discussed. That's another interesting thing about cinema and urbanism, and sort of some of the reading gets at this as a kind of possibility. But film boards and tourist boards are actual historical economic ways that specific cities relate to their depiction, or try and determine and promote their depiction in films, as well as just promoting filmmaking in a given city, because it's generally tends to boost spending. It always seems to boost spending if the movies are big enough in the city, not just with the kind of obvious expenses of making a movie in a city, but all the below the line stuff, right? So that if you shoot a movie largely in a city, you're going to do, for example, a lot of dry cleaning there, probably, right? Because you're not going to ship costumes back to clean them and stuff like that. You're going to hire local carpenters and that kind of stuff. Sarah?
Well, what you were just talking about. So far I've read I'm reading through I think it's by Claire Sherrod. It's sort of a biography.
Will you remind us what your project is?
Culture in New York, basically.
Thanks.
It functions as sort of a biography of Koch, but also what was going on in New York at the time, and like a good chunk of it, just the middle part of it, which I'm still reading through, is about New York from the early '70s until the late '80s, when he wasn't mayor anymore. And I think since Koch died over the weekend, I read something of the Atlantic yesterday, sort of about movies that took place in New York during his time, his reign as mayor. And I was just thinking with what you said about Las Vegas. The Atlantic article sort of marked 1984 as the turning point as to when they started making or showing more movies where going to New York was a big dream, a big concept And I was kind of wondering with what you just said about Courtney and Courtney's project with Las Vegas, if there was, sort of a similar thing going where, they were just happy with any films being made there and about New York, no matter if the depiction is positive or negative. Because, you kind of have all those dystopian films from the 70s until some point in the early 80s that, they take place in the poor areas. You don't really see the rich people at all. But then, I watched Wall Street a couple weeks ago. There's talk of poor people, and you have Martin Sheen's character, but you never see anything outside of Manhattan or whatever beach that Michael Douglas's character lives in. So that's they're almost completely suppressed in that movie, but you have all these movies before then where all you see is the dark side.
What's going on with Woody Allen and before in the Dark Side period in the 70s?
I haven't quite figured it out because I watched a bunch of Woody Allen movies years ago. The only one I've rewatched recently is Annie Hall, and I think he goes to some point where he grew up and he shows her where he lived.
Right. Well, in Annie Hall, there's the scene under the roller coaster where Albie or whatever his name is grew up, and so that's not particularly glamorizing. But there's also this whole opposition between New York and LA that kind of works out in New York's favor in some way, right?
Yeah, he hates driving.
Right, he hates driving, and though we sympathize with both him and Diane Keaton, we sympathize more with him, right? Because it's a Woody Allen movie. So I guess Annie Hall is in what you're calling the dark period. Maybe is Manhattan right at the end of it? Because that's a totally glamorized. I mean,
I think the date I read last night was 1976.
Right.
So,
for the turn.
Yeah. Because this person for the Atlantic, she lined out all these movies that came out before he took office, and I think Manhattan was 76 or 78. I'm not quite sure.
That sounds exactly right, and hopefully there's a way without having to. I mean, as a long-term project, having to go and do some archival work at the office in New York, at the film office, would be interesting. But hopefully you can find out because Koch is was just involved in some heavy promotions, motion picture-ish promotions of New York. So if you watch, I think it's the first episode of the second season of Saturday Night Live. That's the first time he appears on it. It's clear that both his job on the show and the show's job in general is to sort of rehabilitate New York's image because they're making jokes about it. Like his monologue basically tells you that in some kind of supposedly ludic or jocular way. So that's pretty interesting. So what drove you to take up Armé Red Koch?
Well, I never made the connection until you mentioned it the first week, but I was like a year or two ago watching a bunch of movies back to back. It just happened where they all took place in the late 70s, early 80s New York, and they were all showings for like Smithereens and probably some. Guy named Brain Damage and Freaking Hooker. That guy. Penn and Lauder. And, some of Larry Cohen's stuff through that period. But they were all, horror and exploitation movies, but they sort of, pretty upfront about where they took place. What was I thinking? Oh, Smithereens. It kind of has the opposite thing about Annie Hall, where like she wants to get to Los Angeles, but she never has any money, so she never goes there. So it's kind of like the opposite of Annie Hall. Smithereens is kind of an odd movie. But I was thinking, sort of, Born in Flames, the Lizzie Borden movie. It's kind of like what Neve was talking about, sort of the ambiguous space, because it takes place in the future, but it is set in that present-day New York of 1982, I think it is. I'll have to rewatch it.
That's a really interesting example, and suggested, another thing to look at, that there's a kind of different corpus of films as well. So Born in Flames is kind of makes it into art theaters and sort of semi-mainstream art theaters, if you see what I mean, and stuff like that. But it's also a real independent film, in that its funding structure is outside the kind of thinly disguised Hollywood money in New York structure that pays for a lot of these movies, and it's famous for being, it's sort of the example that people use as the kind of high point or real beginning of, depending on the argument, the narrative turn in feminist experimental film or women's experimental film. So it's connected to a bunch, but by that tradition, to a bunch of other kinds of films about New York, like the new wave films of well, yeah, I was going to say Richard Kern in a second, but Richard Kern, but also the Bees, Beth and Scott Bee. And then also I think of Richard Kern probably because of chit chat I've been having about his movies lately as being part of cinema of transgression, but that people like Nick Zed and Kern and the performers in those movies. So they're another way of showing New York, but it sounds like the other corpus is more important, but you might want to. I mean, for a relationship with Ed Koch, because I don't think. I mean, I wonder what it would be that, or whether there was one. It would be interesting if there were. But what the relationship between the New York Film Office and that kind of production is, it's probably pretty minimal, right? Because they don't need to, to make a Kern film or to make a Nick Zed film or to make a film by the Bees. Okay, so the Bees, a lot of their movies were Super 8 and thus minimal crew, and if Lydia Lunch, who was in a lot of these people's films, was your main actress, there's not in the movie there's not a whole lot of she doesn't get a trailer, right? So all that kind of economic stuff doesn't necessarily happen, and the Bees just kind of stole locations, right, with no permission. But it could be that there's some kind of connection. Can you remember if Ed Koch appears in a Kern film somehow, like as fan footage? I don't think
I
that
don't
ever
know.
happened.
The Atlantic article mentioned a film that it's completely on YouTube now, and I can't remember if she's saying it was a documentary about no wave cinema, or if I don't know, or if it was one made during that era. It's completely on YouTube now, but I don't know if she said whether or not he appeared in those, just as even film footage, or so I'll have to look it up.
That new movie, okay, I know it's way past the time period, but that new movie, Marky Mark, called Broken, and Russell Crowe and that hot lady, it's called Broken City, and it is supposed to, I mean, it's fictionalized, but it's supposed to be Edward Koch, I think.
Okay.
And so, and it's not that horrible, it's playing at the fun farm, but it's the same thing where it takes, the opening parts take place in like the 80s, and then it flashes forward to present day, and it has to do with like this mayor trying to clean up the city, but like everything that he has to do. I mean, he's Russell Crowe, so he's an awesome person. And like Mark Wahlberg's your good person, you have to like figure out how horrible he is as he does. I mean, it is just trying to be like a noir, which is like kind of the nice thing about it, but it's done.
Yeah, I was going to say also, like, out of your period, but just interesting conceptually that you might want to think about at another time is, I think it's called Sweet Home Alabama with McConaughey and Reese Witherspoon. Am I getting the title right?
Yeah.
Yeah, is
So-
it McConaughey though?
Isn't it McConaughey?
It's
It's a lookalike.
Or is it the butter?
I don't know if they had the dollars for both McConaughey and
Maybe not.
Witherspoon.
Who's the male lead in
It's
that?
some generic dude.
Anyways, that movie, what I'm sure about that movie is it's about the reunification of New York with the rest of the country after 9/11, right? Because the woman from New York has to marry the guy from the South.
another one too with like Sarah Jessica and Hugh Grant, where they're a divorcing couple like during this time, and then they witness a murder and have to go to the country before they can come back. And film won't find Netflix.
Oh, isn't that more recent where they end up in like the nudist colony?
No, that's Wanderlust.
Oh,
No. This is like 5 years old. Come on.
Yeah, one plus is after they lose their jobs.
Who?
Patrick Dempsey.
Patrick
Oh
Dempsey.
yeah,
Sorry.
they didn't have the dollars.
Sorry.
They didn't have McConaughey money.
I wasn't paying back. I think I'm now down with that. I should have done. What else?
There's some other movie that she mentioned in the Atlantic article that there's about a mayor and it's a Koch stand-in, but I don't remember the title offhand.
Dishonor.
Yeah, I think that might have been that. So,
I would try and instead of adding more and more movies, I would really try and see what I could find out about the office. You know, about those kinds of relationships that you're interested in this.
okay.
And that turning point, and whether you can see anything. Trevor?
Okay, I chose Boston, and I think the first day of class when you said pick a city, I just instinctively said, okay, the Prince of Coil, and there's only a time where I kind of second guessed that, but really that's what, that's the main reason why I chose it. But then when I started actually researching the city, I found out, I first tried compiling a list of all the movies set in Boston, and when I realized that, there's only one definite time period where there were a lot of movies made about Boston, and that was from the late 60s to the early 80s. I thought, oh wow, my favorite time period. But I mean, there are a few films like a little bit in the late 90s, a little bit recently, but they're kind of few and far in between. Like I think the first Boston film, the earliest one was like Mystery Street with, I forgot his name, Ricardo. Baltimore, yeah, I got to place Con. But what was interesting but then once I got a list of the movies, I started doing the IMDb filming location search. So I started compiling addresses and then images from the different films. And what I found is that there are only 4 films that really have a variety of Boston, and those are, I guess it's been a while since I've seen The Verdict, but Charlie from 1968, the Cliff Robertson film, the Thomas Crown Affair, the original, and Prince of Coil. And it's interesting because there are a few films like Love Story and The Out-of-Towners where they only use an airport for the location. Or, so like the chapter 1, A Cinema of Loneliness, or Rent Oprah's Class, I realize that's very true within this time period. All these characters are isolationists, and the film only focuses on specific areas, like, for example, Whose Life Is It Anyway, the Richard Dreyfuss film, where he's paraplegic from the neck down. That's all set in a hospital. Coma with Michael Douglas, same thing. But then there's something like, like the Burt Reynolds cop classic Fuzz from 1970. That the park is like the main location for that. And it's just weird how all these, it's like they pick these isolationist areas. But it's just interesting how all these different films from all different genres reflect Boston at this time. Like recently I saw the Reincarnation of Peter Proud, which is a film no one's heard of, but it's a Michael Sarrazin thriller from like 1975. So it's interesting how there's a lot of, there's like a few well-known movies, but there's a lot of obscure ones too. But it's just interesting to me how there are all these films made during this time period, and they're kind of just dispersed. But it's interesting that you don't get the full view of the city. You don't get the wide shot, the whole city. You only get certain sections, and they're all isolationist characters. Like Charlie, who's mentally retarded. Thomas Crown Affair, he's a billionaire and he doesn't, has no friends. Verdict, Paul Newman's an alcoholic. Prince of Coil has no friends. It's like. But then there are films like The Paper Chase, which is set just at Harvard, and you don't see much outside of that, or stuff like that.
Is that location Harvard?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's at the end of your period, and furthermore, it's mostly set in an isolation thing. But isn't Altered States in Boston?
Oh yeah, that was exactly. That was another one. I have a list at home.
But
I
he
just write- I
doesn't
just
he
write
go
down
to the
names.
zoo, the Franklin Park
Yeah,
Zoo?
there's a whole lot of
I killed it.
stuff
Where
in
is he?
Boston, but that was
Monkey, yeah.
another movie that, that was set in Boston.
So what set of what pre-existing interests does this problem of isolation of an area in the city relate to?
I don't know about pre-existing interests, but I'm always interested in writing about movies that no one writes about. And that's going to be the challenge is I found a few books I ordered through Ohio Link on Boston, but the challenge is going to be finding what information has already been written about some of these things. I know that race seems to be an issue with Boston. One book with Ohio Link was about the 1960s and I guess whatever, I don't know what happened, but whatever happened out of that. And then like there's crime connections, like organized crime connections in Boston, seems like in the past. But other than that, I'm just trying to familiarize myself with the city. I guess I'll have to find maybe like some encyclopedia that has a list of cities so I can get that information. But it seems to me like articles are like the best way of going about the books. Because I don't research I done, like I can find a whole lot of books just on Boston.
I wouldn't be afraid to write about something. I mean, movies that haven't been written about is interesting, but things about Boston that have already been written about, you shouldn't necessarily avoid them because it's possible to say something else, right? To contest what's already been said about them on the basis of what you see in movies. What else?
That new movie, Killing Them Softly, with Brad Pitt, I know that it's taken from a book that the same author wrote, Friends of Eddie Coyle, and it has the same characters in it. Like, you'll hear them say names that are the names of characters in Friends of Eddie Coyle, which would lead me to believe it takes place in Boston as well. And I kind of think it does. And it'd be worth, I mean, it's really good, too, but it'd be worth looking at.
Okay.
But because, especially, like, when you talk about, like, isolation, because most of the scenes take place within the key scenes, the turning point scenes take place in a car, like a car that they go to great lengths to show you guys like sealed, like you can't smoke in it, and it has to do with like the mob and like a contract killer, but and then those Ben Affleck movies, right?
Yeah, no. Well, what's funny is I was looking at Ben Affleck's filmography. I don't know how I discovered this, but his very first film, what shot in Boston, it was called like The Dark End of the Street, and it was about race relations. And he's probably like 5 years old or something like that. It was like his very first film, so that's kind of funny. So.
Have you seen Gone Baby Gone?
No.
Check that one out. You rarely see the moments of mobility or travel in the films. It's all kind of either interiors or just limited to like rooftops or concentrate on the street. So check that one out.
Yeah, the
That's
town
really
just has.
dark film too.
The town has that like the one scene where you see like scenery, like any greenery is like when they drop that girl off with the blindfold and she touches the water. But there's like the only
Right.
time that you get any like natural space in that movie.
And it's expanded on with the
Yeah, she's blindfolded.
no, but the whole mob guy. He's got like this indoor garden or something, right?
I don't know. I really hated that movie. I just watched it
They're
for
like
Canada.
indoors or like close to like urban spaces. It's like super
There's like another garden too that's like a very dark.
it's the main.
Wait, is it the guy who plays the
boss.
gardener in Romeo and Juliet too? It's the same actor, and I think that it is. Yeah, you're right.
Possibly.
So are you mainly thinking about how Boston is represented in fragments and not as a whole? That seems to be what I've heard you say.
Yeah. Well, that's.
Because I know like something
that's
like
just-
Gone Baby Gone, I have a friend in Boston who said it's supposed to be Boston, but it's actually all this neighborhood Jamaica Plain. Or like The Fighter was this town outside of Boston. So you get all these kind of very towny neighborhoody feel in these Boston movies that aren't actually filmed in Boston or don't actually take place in Boston. They're
Well,
supposed to
Jamaica
represent
Plain's not in the city limits. It's
part of Boston, like
Right.
it's integrated enough into the metropolitan area that I mean, I'm not dismissing the question, but it's Boston is divided, but the actual incorporated area of Boston itself is rather small, and then you get these other areas that are variously incorporated. But I wouldn't exactly call JP not. I mean, I grew up there, so my sense of it is that it's not Boston either. But yeah, I guess a very specific working class neighborhood, which has become gentrified.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of funny when I was looking online and I found this blog on the things they put, and someone took pictures of all the different locations and then he wrote captions down below, like the hockey rink that goes like, well, this is what the shitty hockey rink looked like back then. Like it seemed like obviously someone who either lived there or at least knew what it was like back then, and all these different areas have changed, I guess. So it's kind of interesting getting someone's perspective on that, I guess. Or like a dog architecture and that sort of thing. Because I always thought it's interesting, seeing old movies and seeing how they've changed over time, or if they have it.
Well, I am doing Stockholm, and what drew me to the city to begin with, besides just being a city that interests me, is that there are so few films that are filmed there. Even someone like Bergman, who has this huge filmography, only a handful of movies he actually filmed in part or in whole in Stockholm. So it's interesting to see, which leads me to believe that it's sort of a hard city to film in, which made me wonder what the films that do film there, what they sort of get out of using Stockholm as their backdrop. And it's a very, Sweden and Stockholm is a very unique culture. From the research I've been doing, they're very open, even with children, with sex education, things like that. It's apparently has the least number of married people, ratio-wise, or however articulate that. So, and it has the lowest poverty. So I've been starting to look at a few movies to see where the cross-hatching is between sort of those types of things and Swedish culture and the films. I've recently watched and rewatched both The Dragon Tattoo, the Swedish one, Children's Island. I watched a lot of this movie called Man on the Roof, which is just about this guy who goes on the roof of a hospital and starts sniping people. As well as some with Monica, the Bergman film. And yeah, what I found is definitely a theme of sexuality, whether it's Children's Island with the child who's sort of this sort of coming of age story in a rather uncomfortable way for a lot of it. Certainly Both the Dragon Tattoo has several uncomfortable scenes involving sexuality. Some with Monica, these two kids who basically are trapped by their family, their jobs. They go outside the city and have sort of a sexual liberation. And what I found interesting is that very few movies are filmed entirely in Stockholm. Either at the beginning or the middle, the characters often leave. For example, even Wild Strawberries, I think he's trying to get to Stockholm at the end from where he lives. Both Dragon Tattoo starts off in Stockholm, and they go out into a fictionalized city that's 2 or 3 hours away. So I think it's interesting to see. And then someone with Monica, that start off in Stockholm, they escape to the archipelago and then go back to Stockholm. Yes, right now I'm just trying to find what these films have in common with each other and what they're trying to get out of using the city as a whole.
Any interest at all in trying to think that girl with the dragon tattoo sort of over and against the other movies, or maybe looking at girl with the dragon tattoo with focus and things up in the other movies as a way of thinking back. Either there are various ways one can put this, but what it's like to be queer in Stockholm, or what queerness is like in Stockholm, or queer or spaces that are available for queer life in Stockholm. Because one of the dominant ways in which that trilogy, and particularly the Swedish TV modern finance version of it, gets looked at is in terms of the main characters being a lesbian and several people with queerness around. So, I mean, just because I've seen, more than 5 conference papers on that topic, and it's not absent from the literature, and I think it's kind of a lure, like a commercial attraction for those books, both among queer leaderships and kind of titillating not queer leaderships in the community.
I've been struggling with how to view those movies because now there's even 2 different versions of the first movie, and they're based on books, obviously. So bring out sort of what the themes are cinematically versus the themes in the book. Yes, that's something I've struggled with, how to qualify those films within my projects.
I mean, I think one thing you can do is just justify sticking to the Swedish versions by eliminating the corpus to Swedish films, which is already, I think, big, right?
Yeah.
Nothing for that one. So that would do it, and then I mean, I think I think you can just look at the way the films depict Stockholm without worrying too much about doing an adaptation study. And also the questions of adaptation are pretty interesting on a lot of levels, because what's his name, Stig Larsson, so he writes the books, I don't know when, but much earlier than they're published, and doesn't want to publish them because they're basically his response to not having intervened when he saw a rape or something. There's some kind of like guilt trauma. So he keeps the manuscripts for himself, and then they get published, I believe, posthumously. Does anybody know this?
Yeah,
They're posthumous, right? And then they do well, and they go into the movies, right? But one can ask all these questions. So another way that it's tempting to look at those, at Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, particularly the Swedish one and the U.S. one, is as a movie that's got some relation to the poverty of the housing bubble and the financial crisis and the current economic crisis of capital, right? And there are a lot of reasons for this, because the newspaper that the magazine goes up against this political figure who's involved in speculation and arms dealing, and there's a kind of financial swindle that happens, and so on and so forth. But if one considers the books, they're clearly written much too early to have been a way of, even unconsciously processing things, right? But I think for our purposes, you can ignore the issues of adaptation, which are interesting, but just kind of stick to visual performance and so what set of interests, and presumably maybe some telephone, but what set of ongoing interests lead you to ask the question of what are the movies get out of things like stuff, which is I think your basic problem.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to tie it down to a certain time period, for example, because there aren't that many films that were in Stockholm. So yeah, I think just the choices to have a film, or even part of a film in Stockholm, just lead to natural questions of, if there aren't many films in general in Stockholm, what makes these filmmakers want to have portions of their films or all their films in Stockholm? What are they drawing out of the city that other filmmakers just don't cross over, don't consider Stockholm enough? And I actually did contact the Stockholm tourism place, and they basically gave me the same ones that I found. They had a copy and pasted from a website, but apparently one of the characters in the Man on the Roof film is a recurring character. So I'm not looking into those films and see if they have any.
No? Okay. And in the US ones, it does, right? It's like Frank
Oh, is
Reznor
it?
and
Okay.
Wendy Yale.
But when I think of Sweden, I always think of like.
Who's the singer in the remake of the Immigrant Song? Like French Reznor and somebody. Is that Wendy Yale from or not Wendy Yale? Karen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I always think of Sweden as like a less kind of that doesn't make it over here, or didn't used to make it over here because we have been so like historically homophobic that it didn't have a lot of European people like that didn't really go like post this stuff until recently, and there's like a lot of sweet Africa.
Yeah, the last couple weeks I've actually circled a couple times in the state conferences. Like that song, I Don't Care, but apparently it's in like commercial now. But yeah, it's not something I've been considering for this project, but I'll certainly keep my eyes open.
I think that like still it's a base thing.
Yeah.
It's a
They
basis.
still
No,
have
what I
the
mean is a lot of songs that hit with Britney Spears.
Oh, are
produced
written by now. But I mean, but there was like this dead period I feel like between with Dr. Luke and Max Martin. You like Max Martin? I do, yeah. Max Martin, right? But there was like this dead period between like that disco demolition thing and like the guy Max Martin already started doing TLC songs, but there's like this 10-year dead period where I feel like we hated disco so much that anything electronic sort of went away and it wasn't really incorporated and it was attached to like pop culture. So that's a difference. But if you're dealing with like queerness, like I do think that a big reason is because like wouldn't allow in my country or like didn't kind of try to keep those two associated with freedom. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Boy is she. And like that band of sounds.
And one interesting thing I found out that most of those movies that Bergman does that take place on islands, Persona, Food Construct, and a couple more. Yes, Sour Wolf. They all take place on this island that is pretty decent size. It's like the size of Puerto Rico, like average. It's actually between. It's in the middle of the Baltic Sea, so it's not quite Stockholm, but it's sort of just out in the middle of nowhere. So I thought it was interesting that he used this island, which is apparently where his home was and why he probably used it, but as opposed to using, the thousands of islands that are around Stockholm.
Well, these are all very strong starts, I think. I would say this. As you'll see after our little break, I'm a strong believer in doing more, finding out about more than anybody. So I said choose a city, and then I said figure out what you want to do and gave a few options. And you almost all chose, well, you chose various options, but you all, it's interesting, chose to sort of let the city be the container for
sort of project, if you see what I mean, and then find a lot of movies, more than one movie, that happens in the city. Right? It's also, it's not too late if you decide that it would suit your other project better, or be better in various ways, to retain all that information that you've already learned about the other movies, and just have the paper be about one film's representation of Stockholm, or one film's depiction, metaphor, depiction, metaphor, whatever, of Boston, right? And just let those other movies kind of sit on the back burner and see where they're used, depending on how things get. So on one hand, I'm saying you're not obliged to write about a lot of movies. If it's useful to your argument or to other projects, if it's somewhat useful, do it. But if you become extremely interested in one movie, that's what you really are engaging with. That's okay too. And on the other hand, I'm saying you shouldn't feel like it was a waste of time to find out so much about the city and so much about the other movies, even if you end up writing about one movie. Even if there's no mention, even in the footnote, of the other stuff, it still inflects the way you're thinking about it. It kind of delimits the field that you're working with in a different way to know some of what you know. All right, so what I think. Let's come back at 12:30 for a little while, and I'll show you how I would do this, and then